So it is recording now. I cannot hear anything through the earbuds, but I believe that they can hear us through the computer.
That's right. Do you want him to have?
If that can work.
How's it going over there?
We're not getting the microphone working as far as I can. But you can, they can hear.
See if that one is.
Because the other one is if it's this computer, if they can hear on this. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, cool. What I could do is also, I could just keep this computer near me while I speak or whomever is speaking. And then we'll bypass the earbuds issue.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is
Just so that we can get started.
Yeah, please.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, because we're not going to do presenting right away. Is there anything you guys want to say to start, or should I get us going? What do you prefer?
Oh,
However you like. You want to say hello to everyone?
Yes.
John,
Here. So I think I'm going to introduce Anna, who is a Prosocial facilitator, one of the couple here. And then I was then going to introduce Joe.
Oh, that's nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll just set this so people can see you and hear you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us through this. The technical issues. We are at the public library. What is the Rundell Memorial Public Library here in Rochester. And I'm trained in prosocial facilitation. In my day job, I work with children with autism. I am a behavior analyst. And so one of the things that drew me to Joe and Penny's work is that they use contextual behavioral science in prosocial, and they embed prosocial in pretty much all of the work that they do. So that is really kind of taking not only people's thoughts and feelings, but also their behaviors into how we can develop more collaborative groups. And Joe and Penny are here from Barichara, Columbia.
What was her last name? You weren't here.
Yeah, so for anybody on the call here who may not be familiar, they work in, they do a reforestation project in Barichara, Columbia. They also are part of a foundation that helps to fund other regenerative projects. And they are doing bioregional activation. So they're going around to different bioregions in the Great Lakes area to activate and basically share with us their formula, or the lack of formula, I guess. It's not prescriptive, but to basically how they've been able to really form a cohesive bioregion in Barichara. And he's going to talk to us more today about how we can regenerate the earth by activating bioregions across the world, really.
I thought so we just like put Anna on the spot.
There's now a working microphone, you believe?
Okay. Well, I can also do it this way if they want, but I can do it this way too.
Yeah.
Where someone can set this where they could see us. I kind of like this because then they can see me too, and I'll just talk to you all and hi everyone, and I'll be looking up at them. So you can see we've got a nice group here at the library. That's some good friends. I think we'll be okay just using this for now.
Okay.
Just so we can get rolling in it. So hi everyone. I'm Joe. For those of you who don't, the one hired Joe. This is my partner. And he's right over there. You guys see. And what I want to do right now is share with you what we had in mind. Because all of you who were there with us last night know that we talked about big, complex, challenging, save humans from extinction, planetary breakdown, how to organize at the scale that is needed, what it takes to regenerate watershed. While we're navigating the 30-second version of the conversation we had. And one of the things that seems might be helpful is to explore how we can actually cooperate but do it in a way that is really tangible. I'm thinking about how small groups of people coming together and collaborate. And so, what I thought might be nice is to give a little introduction to the body of knowledge. Sometimes people call it a framework. Actually, deny the term framework, because it's actually a collection of knowledge with many frameworks and tools that are informed by the Hi, everyone. Is that prosocial is the word that basically means that you work. I being kind, I being receptive, I being a listener, I being cooperative, I being optimistic. You can be cooperative or you can be but there's a
Audio is really poor.
Because normally Zoom works by so maybe there's a problem with Zoom. Can you guys hear me okay now? No? It seems like it's pretty excellent. I'm guessing it's a problem with Zoom.
Just muted you. Can everybody hear this better?
Whatever you did just then, wonderful.
This, okay. Joe, why don't you speak into my phone?
Really want to be attentive to everyone. Yeah, now they're looking in the back of my head, but that's okay. They can look at Anna, they can look at all of you. Yeah, we don't want anyone to vomit from vertigo. Okay, so what I want to share with you is something that has been life-changing for me. It's been life-changing for Penny, as she could tell her story if she likes, which is learning the insights, the kind of knowledge that's necessary to be part of a functioning group. And it turns out most of us have a lot of experience with dysfunctional groups in our work settings, in our classrooms, as kids, as students, as teachers, as participants of sports teams, as people ordering pizza together, in all kinds of group settings. We have a lot of history of dysfunctional groups. And there is knowledge about how to function well in groups. And so I want to give a slideshow, a brief presentation so we can see it together and have a shared understanding of 3 domains of knowledge that represent large bodies of research and techniques and tools, each of those 3 domains of knowledge that can help us form really effective groups. And so before we do that, though, I just want to remind us of the motivation for it. Welcome. I want to remind us of the motivation for it, which is that we have challenges that are incredibly complex, that are larger than anything that any one person could ever have hope of even making a positive contribution to. Meaning you might do some positive thing in your local space while the larger system changes exponentially and overwhelms all of the good that you do. Like you might plant 1,000 trees while 10 million trees go away because of changing weather patterns. Then we just get absolutely overwhelmed by the scale of the changes that are occurring. And so this is where that thing of your individual contribution systemically does not matter. And we all feel that, right? We all feel like we're so powerless in the face of what's happening. What's incredible, though, is that our collective impacts can be systemic. And that means we have to be really good at working in groups. And so there's actually a saying that I like to use from a behavioral economist who recently passed away just a few weeks ago, Herb Gintis. Herb Gintis is a behavioral economist. And he likes to say that the fundamental adaptation for humans is teamwork. That humans form teams in a way that no other animal does. And we're going to explore a little bit of that today to see how to create this kind of teamwork. And then what we're going to see is that the way of doing this is actually fully systemic. It's completely consistent with what is known in the study of complex adaptive systems. It turns out that human behavior is a complex adaptive system, and human groups are also complex systems. And that means that if we understand how they can create synergies, then we can create really effective groups. And as we're going to explore today, there are 3 aspects that are fundamental to this kind of work. One aspect is how our bodies process emotions. So how I process emotions inside my body as a member of a group. There's a second part, which is how do we understand whether the dynamics, the interactions between members of a group are functioning or not in service to the group. And then the third is how does the group function in its context to adapt to changes in the context or to dynamically guide and evolve the context to change it. And we have to have an understanding of all 3 of these things to be able to effectively navigate the complexities of what we're dealing with. And so what I thought I would do is just share some slides, which is basically to give us a common language. And then I would like to invite both Penny and Anna to share some of their experiences working with one of the tool sets that we're going to talk about today, which is called the ACT matrix. I'll explain what that is soon. Comes out of contextual behavioral science, just to give you a flavor of how rich it is. And just as the teaser, the ACT matrix is consistent with every mindfulness practice in every culture that we know of on Earth. To say it's not simply like a tool, it's insights into those mechanisms and how they work. And it is a tool set that's so useful that tens of thousands of therapists and organizational change practitioners use it. So it's a very useful tool, but it's really built on a tremendous body of knowledge. And so that's my introduction to what I think we could talk about today. And ask if either you have anything you want to say before I go into the presentation, or if there are any questions before we go further. I know you just jumped in, so thank you for coming for the ride. Yeah, Victoria.
Just gonna try to share the
Well, I'm going to share screen from my laptop.
this isn't true.
No, it's not my laptop. That's why.
Yeah, and questions then.
I'm just going to grab my computer now. So let me grab my computer so that we have it handy, so that I can advance in the slides. Cool. So if everyone, all right, so I think everyone can see my slides here. Unfortunately, when I have the HDMI cable connected and on Zoom, I don't have the ability to take that away, which is kind of annoying. It's not appearing on Zoom, and it's one of those cases where I don't know if I can or not, because I don't have any cursor control when it's in presenter mode. So that's an annoying feature of Zoom. Apologies for that. All of you on Zoom don't see what I'm telling everyone in the room about. So just as a reminder, we're talking about creating these large scale systems. Like we want to regenerate and restore the health of an entire watershed or 500,000 hectares of connected land that might be part of some larger system. So like a branch of the Mississippi River or a mountain range or a coastal estuary. We're talking at this large scale. And that means we need a lot of cooperation. And that's like the basic thing is there's no way to imagine how would we bring the Amazon River back after its collapse that it's about to do. You know, it's, as we talked about yesterday, the Amazon is right on the edge of flipping over through a tipping point to become grassland savanna because of deforestation and a hydrological cycle that's connected to it. How would you ever restore something like that? That's the size of half of a continent. And it would be through an immense amount of cooperation. And so we need to talk about how cooperation works. And one of the things that really struck me when I was learning about because I have a strong background in cognitive behavioral sciences. And I work specifically in an area called cognitive linguistics with a linguist named George Lakoff. And so this is something that is a big part of my life, is this kind of work. And so I was really struck when I wrote down this question. Like 6 or 7 years ago, I came up with this question. What if behavioral flexibility is the root cause of the Earth's ecological crisis? It turns out B.F. Skinner said this first in the early 80s, and I was pretty inspired by him. But behavioral flexibility, as the name suggests, is the ability to change your behavior as you change the situation that you're in. Well, as a simple example, a rock has very limited behavioral flexibility. It can sit or it can be pushed and it can roll, but it actually can't guide its own behavior at all. A plant does have behavioral flexibility because it can grow towards sunlight. And then if you turn it, it'll grow the other way, and it can actually behaviorally adapt. It has flexibility to change its behavior to grow towards sunlight as the sunlight's moving. So plants actually have some behavioral flexibility, certainly more than a rock. But then if you think of something like a rat, a mammal with a central nervous system and a brain, like they have this incredible, there's famous rats are used in psychology lab experiments because they have social learning. They can learn and they can adapt their behavior, and they have a repertoire, a diversity of behavioral responses that they can develop. So there's more behavioral flexibility in a rat than in a potted houseplant. So I'm showing that as you move across different kinds of organisms, behavioral flexibility is how much diversity of behavior is available, either genetically programmed as instincts or as learned behaviors. So there's a whole realm of psychology about behavioral flexibility. Turns out humans are off the charts for behavioral flexibility. I mean, we can learn things like how to get addicted to TikTok. We can learn things like how to race Lamborghinis in the Swiss Alps. We have all kinds, like we have this seemingly endless, it's not endless, but we have this incredible diversity of behaviors. And just look across our cultures, the different rituals, the different religions, the different ways of dating and marrying and raising children, ways of wearing clothing, ways of dancing, there's just like on and on. There's this tremendous behavioral flexibility. But unfortunately, our behavioral flexibility comes with a problem, which is we're so adaptive as an organism, as an animal, that we can use up all of the resources in our environment, develop a new technology to extract or exploit another resource in the environment until it's used up, and keep going until we've completely destroyed an environment. Or we can move to an environment unlike any that we've ever lived in before and develop the technologies to exploit the resources of that environment until we cover the entire planet. So the behavioral flexibility of humans has enabled us to adapt to all of these different environments and to use up all of these resources. For those of you who are ecologically minded, there's a name for this. It's called K strategist. An R strategist, the word R is for rate of reproduction, just like what spiders do, where a spider will produce 10,000 baby spiders, but then the mother doesn't care for them. They just all run off, and most of them die, but a few of them survive. So their strategy is rate of reproduction. K strategy, K actually means carrying capacity, but the C was used for something else in ecology, so they had to use K, which is confusing. But basically, they are organisms that can change the capacity of the environment by changing their behavior. And humans do this unlike any other animal, which is why we have successfully depleted or destroyed so many environments across the planet. And so we have this behavioral flexibility that has literally changed the climate system and the composition of organisms because of rate of extinction across the whole planet. And so this is what I mean by behavioral flexibility is the root cause of the Earth's ecological crisis. And so we need to understand things like how can humans be fragmented and divided against each other? How can we do things like dehumanizing another group so that we can kill them, which is something we do during times of war? We have all these different ways that we can behave. And we need to understand how all of that works so that we can create this kind of a context that you see in the bottom right, which is to have a pro-social goal that we cooperate to achieve together, like a group of people planting a tree. And the interesting thing about this, as simple as that example is, notice that other animals do not identify a shared goal, have a semantic realm called language, where they can communicate with each other how to achieve this goal, and then collaborate step by step until they have reached it. This is something only humans can do. And to know that planting that tree might have some ecological benefit 50 years in the future, to imagine that future to motivate us in the present, that's something other animals can't do. And so this capacity to set shared purpose and engage in collective action is something that is profoundly different for humans than for non-humans. And what this means is we need to intentionally guide the evolution of human culture. We have to select the aspects of culture so that we don't create fragmentation, polarization, dehumanization, this othering effect that leads to the breakdown of cooperation and ultimately to conflict and violence. And instead select for pro-social behaviors that bring us into cooperation, alignment, shared purpose, shared identity, compassion for each other, and other things that we need to achieve our goals. And so this is where behavioral flexibility becomes really important. But what's interesting is that if we look at the evolution of social behaviors, like what happens with ants, we can see that evolution gives rise to many kinds of social organization, and that we can learn about key aspects of cooperation from things like, look at those leafcutter ants. How did they use chemical signaling and what's called phenotypic expression, which means they're all genetically identical. Those are all sisters from the same mother. They're genetically identical, but they can have very different body types depending on which parts of their genes are expressed. Have big ants and little ants, even though they're genetically identical. So different aspects of cooperation that we can learn from ants. Or if you look at the slime mold, a slime mold, that's a single-celled organism. That is not a multicellular organism. Those are individual spores, little organisms that cooperate to create these really complex structures called slime molds. And so if you ask yourself, what are the conditions in which the individuals form a superorganism, form a collective? What's interesting about the slime mold is that it's profoundly altruistic. That sometimes you could have 100,000 individual single-celled organisms that grow this branching structure to find food, so that only 1% of them get food and all of the rest of them die off, and they have sacrificed themselves for the good of the colony, even though they're single-celled organisms. And then you can start to say, what are the conditions for designing our way to higher levels of cooperation, the way that a slime mold does it? This is called biomimicry, learning the patterns of nature. But it's important to know that when we talk about cooperation, we don't have to limit ourselves to human cooperation. We can look at cooperation in all of its forms to learn how to do this. And then we can see that there are patterns of interaction that can give rise to collective intelligence, like a school of fish. Do you know what the collective intelligence is of a school of fish? All of those fish are swimming as if they're a big thing instead of a bunch of little things. And they have silver glittery bodies when the sunlight shines on them, which confuses predators. So when the predators try to bite them, they miss. The collective intelligence is what happens when all of those individual fish know how to swim together. And so there are patterns of interaction that just give emergent capacity for collective intelligence. And we need to know how this works. And also this is a murmuration of starlings, kind of birds. By the way that they make these incredible patterns is the distance from wingtip to wingtip on the left and the right, and the velocity of departure for the bird in front. They're trying to catch up with the bird in front and keep the same distance to the left and right. And with that simple rule of interaction, that incredible pattern emerges. And so the birds can be individually dumb and collectively intelligent. And this is something about how complex systems work, but it's also something about how cooperation works. If we understand the rules of interaction, like try to stay the same distance from the birds on the left or right, very simple rule, then this incredibly complex behavior can emerge. And so these are insights about how to be pro-social. Those starlings are being pro-social. They can actually set the direction for where they fly to find a nest for the night through this pattern of interacting with the bird to the left and the bird to the right without there ever being a leader. The whole murmuration is the leader. So there's just incredible things that nature does. And it's with that in mind that I just want to name, there are entire libraries of books. We're going to talk about Prosocial, this one, which I recommend you read if you haven't, it's really good. The Nordic Secret, I don't know if we'll get to that or not, but that's something that's in the slides. And I just wanted you to know that there are probably 10,000 books on the evolution of cooperation. Entire libraries are full of them. So I just wanted you to know there are a lot. The evolution of cooperation, sociobiology, does altruism exist? The Secret of Success is one that I highly recommend if you want to understand cultural evolution and how humans do this. But there are thousands of books. Oh my God, so much stuff. I just want you to know that I'm dipping into a massive body of knowledge when talking about this. And so, as I said, Herb Gentis told us the fundamental adaptation of humans is teamwork. Look, think of what it takes to collect the wood, to gather together in a pile, to know how to use sticks to make a spark, these technological knowledge that can be very sophisticated. And then they might engage in collective hunting, like there might be 5 hunters with spears that take down a dangerous animal. They're like levels and levels of cooperation for our ancestors to have survived to come to the present. So I just want you to know that this teamwork is a really big deal. And so that brings us to Prosocial World, which is an organization that gathers all of this knowledge and shares it and trains people in it. And that it's an integration of deeply coherent research. So this is why I say it's not a framework. Sometimes people say, oh, it's a framework. You mean like nonviolent communication? Or is it a framework like appreciative inquiry? Or is it a framework like sociocracy? And I'm like, all of those can be used with this and many more. Actually, Penny and I just got to meet one of the creators of appreciative inquiry when we were in Cleveland this week, as he's a professor at Case Western. But anyway, another story. And so the thing I want to say is that there are deeply coherent research means lots of different research studies, but that they cohere, they reinforce the same insights. And the 3 pillars of knowledge that Prosocial World builds on are the core design principles for managing a commons, which we're going to talk about now, an entire body of knowledge called contextual behavioral science, which is sort of the blending together of evolutionary, behavioral, cognitive, organizational, like a vast swath of research that goes by the name contextual behavioral science. And then all of the research in the evolution of cooperation, which I was just touching on with the examples before. So there are these massive bodies of knowledge and they all converge. And so let's start with the core design principles. These are probably some of the most useful things to know to get started in forming a group. And this is the work of a very special woman, Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize. And she spent decades showing that Garrett Hardin's famous 1967 paper, The Tragedy of the Commons, was false and disproven upon publication. And so what she studied was how do people manage common pooled assets? So if you have a group of people, like people grazing their animals on the same pasture, how do they manage that grazing land effectively? That's the tragedy of the commons that Garrett Hardin had. All these selfish individuals who must maximize their utility in neoclassical economics, which is basically ideological bullshit. Those of you who have watched what economics is today, most of what we call economics is ideological bullshit. There is real economics, but it's not that. And so Garrett Hardin was off his rocker with totally untrue statements about human nature or economics. Still one of the most quoted essays in environmental philosophy, but it's hard to get rid of, even though it was a pile of crap in 1967, because Elinor Ostrom had already disproven it. Because what she did is she went around the world as a political scientist, studying different settings where people had to manage something in common. And she asked, how well do people do at this? And it turns out there's a range. Some places people manage these common pooled assets like par excellence, like incredible. They're amazing. They're so good. And others are horrible. They just like Gerhard, they just mess it all up. And what happens is it's a big bell curve. Most examples are people do it sort of okay, but not great. And what she found was when they do it really well, there are 8 criteria that are always met. These 8 criteria, she calls them core design principles. So that's the language that'll be on the slides. I like to call them system capacities. Capacities of the collective, the social system, to be able to manage themselves. But you'll see it works either way. And what's important, as I'm about to share them with you, is that you need all 8. And they do not function in isolation. They actually work together. Which means if you're in a group, by the way, a group is a common pooled asset. Imagine a conversation where one person dominates and no one else can get a word in. The common pooled asset of the conversation is a poorly managed commons in that case. So all groups are commons. And actually, David Sloan Wilson, who Penny and I stayed with earlier this week, was one of the authors of the Prosocial book. He worked with Elinor Ostrom and generalized these principles to all living systems, which means your body, as a collection of 37 trillion cells, will meet these 8 core design principles. And if it doesn't, that means you're sick. That means you're unwell. Your holistic health depends on these 8 core design principles because your body is a common pooled asset. And so let's go through them. And notice as we go through them, that if you're in a group that's not working very well, you could use this list as a diagnostic and say, at least one of them isn't working. So just let's start going through them. First one, core design principle number 1, is you need to have shared identity and purpose. You need to know who is a member of the group, who is not a member of the group, and what the group is for. So for example, these ants, you can tell who the members are. They're the same species of the same colony. They can tell their difference by chemical scent or by other factors for different kinds of animals. They know who is and who is not a member of their colony, and they have a very clear shared purpose: reaching the food. Or in this example, in the boat, the rowboat, the shared identity is who's in the boat and who's not in the boat. And their shared purpose is to go as fast as they can in a straight line toward the finish line, right? And maybe to get there before other boats if they're in a race. So it's very clear shared identity and purpose in both those cases. But look at this example on the bottom. What's happening there? Their shared identity is that they're all members of the same community. And their shared purpose is to feel connection and belonging to the community in some kind of ritual or ceremonial activity. They could be holding hands, they could be singing a song, they could be praying, whatever they're doing, they have shared identity and shared purpose. And so we've all been in groups where we don't quite know what the purpose of the group is. We don't quite know who's supposed to do what, and it makes a mess of the group. So shared identity and purpose is really important. Core design principle number 2 says that you need an equitable distribution of contributions and benefits. Notice the word is not equal, because some people do more, other people do less, and there needs to be a felt sense of equity, which is not the same as a quantified measure of equity. Some people are more generous, other people are more self-oriented, and so they need to each feel that it's equitable, which means you're continually navigating what that means as members of the group. And so if there are people who grow more of the food, maybe they get more of the food. This means that free riders, people who show up and don't do anything and then take for themselves, will undermine the cohesion of the group. There needs to be a sense of equity in the distribution of contributions and benefits. You also need fair and inclusive decision-making. So I like the example of the Iroquois Nation or the Ute people, the Ute tribe of Colorado.
Other groups who know the Native Americans, where they had really powerful ways of creating inclusive decision making. Like there'd be councils of men and councils of women, and they'd have relationships between them to be sure that there were inclusive decisions between the different aspects of the culture and what they brought. But you could see this in any group. Like, let's say you're in a second grade classroom and your teacher sets the rules about how decisions are made, and you as a student are like, well, that's not fair. You might rebel against the class. You might come to hate school and just stop studying. You might not stop listening to the teacher because that is coercive domination to say, I decide how the rules are made and you don't get to have any say in it. Even children know that isn't fair. So this idea of fair and inclusive decision-making is fundamental to feeling included and feeling a sense of participation in a group. This one's really interesting. The monitoring of agreed behaviors, which means in this group, we don't do that, whatever that behavior is. In this group, we don't talk, we don't interrupt each other. In this group, we don't take more than our share. So I like this example called See, Hear, Feel, Do. This comes from a really awesome thing called the Good Behavior Game. It was developed for second grade classrooms, but they've applied in lots of settings since. And what you can do, this is actually based on the ACT matrix we're going to talk about soon, is they have the kids in the classroom. So they create self-governing classrooms with second graders. So the kids learn democracy and they govern their own classroom. The way they do this is the kids get to create the list of the behaviors they want, the good behaviors. So they say, what do we want to see more of? And I can read some: playtime, happiness, homework done, good reactions, kindness. What do we want to see more of? What do we want to hear more of? Here's some people asking to be friends, teachers giving compliments, like maybe the teacher just complains, kids cheering, happy teachers, happy sounds. What do we want to hear more of, right? What do we want to feel more of? Happiness, surprised, hopeful, safe. What do we want to do more of? Play outside when there's nice weather. More PE, more exercise, being on time. Maybe you're that kid that's like annoyed by the other kid who's late and then you never get started. You're like, I want us to do more being on time. And what's beautiful is once you make this list, which they always write it like this, and you put it on the wall, now everyone can monitor the agreed behaviors. I see Billy's not doing this one, we can help him. Let's help Billy do it better. And they become the self-regulating group of the good behaviors. So the monitoring of agreed behavior is not even about punishing the behaviors. It's just about everyone seeing together what the good behaviors are and helping each other. So you can redirect, you can gently reprimand, you can compliment. Wow, Anna, you're such a good listener. So you can enforce it positively. And so this is because everyone knows what they are. So the monitoring of agreed behaviors is a really big deal. You're probably noticing you've been in workplaces or other groups where these things were not happening, right? Number 5, graduated responding to helpful and unhelpful behavior, which means if people don't do the agreed behaviors, you need ways to redirect them. And if they consistently don't do the good behaviors, you need ways to get rid of them, to kick them out of the group. The group's function is threatened by the antisocial person. And I want to explain that with a more severe example, which comes out of research in hunter-gatherer societies. I'm drawing on the work of Christopher Boehm, so you can read more about it if you want, which says that in hunter-gatherer societies, there is very strong enforcement of sharing behaviors. Like, let's say there's a group of hunters and they go out and take down a mastodon or some massive animal. And there is very, very rigid control of how the meat is shared so that it's equitable to ensure the cohesion of the group. Because if the cohesion of the group breaks down, it is life-threatening to the members of the group. So this, in hunter-gatherer societies, there's strong egalitarianism. So let's say that you have a narcissistic psychopath who happens to be a really good hunter. And this person brags a lot, tries to take more than their share because they think they deserve it. And this undermines the group. Well, the initial response would be to talk about that person or to encourage them to change their behavior or to use storytelling. And while Bob is the person who likes to take things for himself, I'm going to tell the story of Father Antelope. And then I'm going to tell a story about Father Antelope takes more than his share and that we don't like that. And there are these bad things that happen. Everyone knows we're talking about Bob, right? And these kinds of things, this moderating of behavior through gossip and through reputation and through story, which means Bob can save face. We didn't call him out, but everyone knows we're talking about Bob, and Bob gets the chance to redeem himself. And if that doesn't work, we can raise the stakes to temporary or permanent banishment. Bob keeps taking more food than his share, he's out, which in hunter-gatherer societies could mean death, to be alone in the landscape. So this happens a lot less often, but it does happen. But what if Bob happens to be a serial killer? What if Bob starts killing other members of our tribe or starts blood feuds with a neighboring tribe? There's actually evidence in the ethnographic record that people come together and engage in capital punishment, and they kill Bob. And these pictures actually show a bunch of people holding spears and one person with a bunch of spears in them, because this actually does happen on rare occasions. But what you can see is that there are different levels of responding for different levels of behavior. And this is the graduated responding, which allows the group to be adaptive and flexible to what is happening. And this is really important. So while that's an extreme example, it makes the point of how important different levels of responding are. You also need fast and fair conflict resolution. Notice that fast and fair depend on context. Sometimes fast is it's resolved in 10 seconds. Sometimes fast means it's resolved in 3 months. Depends on what the conflict is and how much work it takes to address it. And so if you don't have fast and fair conflict resolution, then what can happen is the conflict is addressed by creating resentment that lingers in the group, or creating a situation where someone feels the outcome of the conflict was unfair and that they did not have fair and inclusive decision making, which goes back to another one of the core design principles. Or that the group has a different purpose than what this group is about, which can break down the cohesion of the group. And so this fast and fair conflict resolution can balance and moderate because conflicts always arise. Every group has conflicts, and you need good ways of managing them. And then this one is one that I really like: the authority to self-govern. If a group has a purpose, they've figured out what their purpose is, but their purpose does not map the jurisdiction of the thing they're trying to do, then they're going to really just struggle and it's not going to work. So for example, if you have a council of people whose job is to manage a watershed, but that watershed is Lake Ontario, which crosses between the United States and Canada, the jurisdiction is whatever the bilateral agreements are between two nation states, which may not be the authority of that watershed council. So there are frequent cases where the group has a purpose that they're trying to manage, but they don't have the authority to manage the thing that they're trying to manage. And so this is a big one. And so you notice that murmuration we talked about earlier, the starlings have the capacity to self-govern. As a collective, they can decide where to go. And so, whereas if you look at something like the New York metropolitan area, you'll have regional planning authorities, city boundaries, metropolitan areas, counties, state lines, all different jurisdictions, all different institutional structures, and a total mess of governance. Which leads to the last one: collaborative relations with other groups. Which means if your group needs to interact with another group, here we go again. What is it when two groups interact? What they have to interact around is another group, which means that the collaborative relations need to meet all 8 of these core design principles as well. And this is where we see something like the Iroquois Nation, where there are these different tribes, and each tribe is a commons, It's governing itself. And they created a relationship of governance among the tribes that is also a commons. And this leads to what Eleanor Ostrom called polycentric governance, many centers of governance, which means that this process is fractal. It has a holonic or a whole part relationship. It can move up and down in structure, which means the 8 core design principles can be something as simple as a romantic relationship between two people. Is that simple? All the way up to the governing of a nation, like the Iroquois Nation, the governing of a continent or a planet, or a galactic empire. Let's talk about Star Wars. You can see how in Star Wars, the Emperor did not follow Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles. And he created a lot of conflict and war, as I recall. The rebellion formed because, anyway, enough said. So you see, these 8 core design principles are really powerful because they're so clear in principle, yet they're so nuanced in practice that you can adapt them to every single context. And you need all 8. So that's the core design principles for managing the commons. You can imagine that's a big body of knowledge by itself. And I just want to touch into contextual behavioral science, and this will get into the realm that Anna and Penny might have things to add. And I want to start by saying that human behavior is an evolutionary process. So let's review our Charles Darwin, which is basically this white box on the right, which is that within any population, there is variation of traits. There can be anatomical traits, there can be behavioral traits, but there's variation. And because there's variation, some of those traits are better adapted to the environment than others. And there is a natural selection process, which is the things that are better adapted tend to survive better, and the things that are not as well adapted tend to go away, which means that you accumulate over time the adaptive traits. That is evolution by natural selection. What's amazing is that this is how behavior works. And here's a quote from B.F. Skinner where he says, "We have seen that in certain respects, operant reinforcement resembles the natural selection of evolution." Oh, I wish I could read this, but I can't on my own computer because that bar. Just as genetic characteristics which arise as mutations are selected or discarded by their consequences. Notice they're selected or discarded by their consequences, which means how well does it perform in its environment? So, a hemophiliac will perform less well in an environment where they're walking on broken glass. They're going to bleed out and die. And so you're like, okay, so the consequence of the trait plays out in the environment. But now let's look at how that works for behavior. And I've got this lovely, inspiring example on the bottom, which is, let's say you're a tobacco company and you want to sell tobacco to make money. So you want to have a selective environment that makes it more likely people smoke. And you're like, a great way to get people to smoke is to catch them while they're young. Get teenagers to start smoking as part of their core identity, and then you'll be able to sell cigarettes all across their lifespan because those cigarettes are really addictive. How do we get teenagers to smoke? Let's invent a cartoon character called Joe Camel. And then let's market to those teenagers with the coolness of Joe Camel to tell them that smoking is cool. And then when these young people start smoking, what happens? The selection environment has just selected for more smoking behavior. And it also selected for more marketing to kids because the tobacco companies sold more tobacco, made more money, and they could spend more money manipulating the public with marketing. And this is a biased selection environment where the money creates a positive feedback loop to increase the prevalence of smoking. So I just wanted to show you how this works, that the evolution of behavior at a cultural level is a process of evolution. So while that's maybe a sort of despicable example, we see that it works, doesn't it? So what if we wanted to select for different behaviors than that? We'd still use the same knowledge of how behaviors are selected by their environments, but we would select for different behaviors. And that's what leads us to this really profound insight that the most powerful way to change behavior, this comes from the work of Stephen Hayes, who's one of the creators of contextual behavioral science, one of the creators of the ACT matrix we're going to talk about in a minute. It said that there's like a whole bunch of research in public health, whether you're looking at how well do people stay married and have good relationships, how well do people stay devoted to their studies and graduate from high school or graduate from college, whatever way you want to measure a successful life, it requires the ability to do this, which it requires the ability to relate your present self to your future self. And you relate your present self to your future self through the regulation of emotion and psychological flexibility. The example I like to give is, let's say you're a college student, it's Friday night, your friends are going to go out having beers and go drinking and shoot some pool, and you've got a big exam on Monday. And here you are on a Friday, imagining yourself on Monday. Did you spend the weekend studying for the exam, or did you go out partying? If you're really committed to the future self who's ready for that exam on Monday, you regulate your emotions, that impulse, that desire to go hang out with your friends. And you're like, I really want to go out with you guys, but I got to stay here. And the psychological flexibility is the ability to imagine different futures. And this capacity is the capacity for a successful life, is this combination of things. And this is called relational frame theory, that you relate to different parts of yourself. And the most important relationship is your present self to your future self. You moderate your behaviors now with the emotional responses in your body now to arrive at the future you want for yourself, which means you have to know what it feels like to be the person you want, and you have to know what it feels like to be the person you don't want, so that you can choose now with behavioral responses in your body. And this is something humans can do. And this is what leads to the ACT matrix. ACT is short for acceptance and commitment therapy. Sometimes it's acceptance and commitment training, because it's not always needed for therapy. You could use it just for team building, even if there's no trauma or dysfunction involved. But the basic idea, I really don't like that bar is there. The basic idea is that you can imagine all of human behavior with 2 lines. How cool is that? 2 lines. The horizontal line is the difference between observable behaviors in the world above the line and internal subjective experiences below the line. So above the line would be things like, do I see you smiling? That's an observable behavior. Do I feel content? I might be smiling while I don't feel content because I'm a good actor. So there's a difference between externally visible behaviors and internally felt experiences. So below the line is your inner world of experience, and above the line is observable experiences. Now, the horizontal line is that we have 2 psychological drives, 2 motivational capacities: to avoid things and to seek things, right? Things we want less of and things we want more of. And so if you say things that we want less of are on the left and things we want more of on the right, I see this ACT matrix sometimes flipped around. But the basic idea is, with these 2 lines, you can divide the world into observable behaviors you want less of on the upper left, observable behaviors you want more of on the upper right, internal felt experiences you want more of on the lower right, and internal experiences you want less of on the lower left. And notice what's in the middle. Noticing. The capacity to relate present self to future self is to do something that's really hard. To notice without judgment, accept whatever you notice, and then commit to the path you want. This is where all of mindfulness practice is, in that noticing box. Zen koans, Buddhist meditation, yoga, you name it, it's all right there. Which is why this very simple tool with 2 lines in a box allows you to learn how to navigate any behavior change that you need to make in your life. And it works like this. Now I'm just going to give this example, and I think Penny may have another example if she wants to share it. That if you think of the external world, internal world, away and toward, that's the shorthand. So we have 4 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we say, let's imagine someone you really want to be like, someone you admire. Maybe it's your high school janitor, maybe it's Martin Luther King, maybe it's Mother Teresa, but imagine someone you really want to be more like. In quadrant 2, write down a list. What do you see that person doing? Oh, I see them generously giving to others. I see them waiting their turn, whatever it is. What are observable behaviors? And you write them down. All right, which values and feelings are expressed by those observable behaviors? You write them down in quadrant 4. Generosity, compassion, justice, contentment, peace. Things that might be part of the inner experience while someone's doing those things. And then you say, okay, who's someone you don't want to be like? Maybe I don't want to be like Adolf Hitler. Maybe, maybe I don't want to be like whoever that cop was that killed the first black guy that started Black Lives Matter. Pick someone. Maybe I don't want to be my dad who beat me up because he was a drunk. Pick someone you don't want to be like. Well, what do you see them doing? I see them hitting my mom. I see them yelling. I see them not being able to control their emotions. And you write them down in quadrant 1. Which values and feelings are being expressed? Anger, confusion, out of control. And you write those down in the lower left. And now, once you've written them down, you can do imagination exercises. Okay, how often do I engage in those behaviors that I see this person doing? What do I feel like when I do those things? I know this person I really don't want to be like. Do I ever do any of those things? I better notice and accept it. I do those things. Like sometimes I'm ashamed of how I actually feel and I lie. Even though I don't like when someone does that. I don't like that about myself, but I need to notice it and accept it. Turns out if I can't accept it, I can't get to that place of commitment. And this is how you create an internal compass in your body with your felt senses of what your body is doing to navigate away from the behaviors you don't want and toward the behaviors you do, which is why this framework is so incredibly useful. And so just to show you how this works, how that fractal aspect of it works, my inner experience and collective behaviors are a commons, which means I could apply all of Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles to my own emotions and to myself as a collection of internal identities, all kinds of different ways I could be as a person, which means that I could explore my own identity and purpose and connect it to the shared identity and purpose of a group, which means we can use this ACT matrix as individuals and as groups and go through similar kinds of activities. And you can use this to help get into the felt sense and the behaviors. This can be a way to identify those behaviors that you want in your group. Would be through activities like this, which is why this is so powerful. And so, as I said, you can use this approach to address all of Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles. You could actually go through and say, okay, so what are some ways we've seen conflict resolution done well? Write them down. What are some ways I've experienced conflict resolution that went badly? Write them down, that I want less of or more of. Just by structuring it as a polarity, we're implicitly using this matrix, which means once you understand the matrix, you don't actually have to draw it. You can just use it to structure and facilitate a process. And so I actually think I'm going to stop there because I think that that's a good place for us to have some discussion. And I want to ask if either of you, Anna or Penny, would like to share your experiences with the ACT matrix and what you see for others to have a sense of it. Maybe use that so that people on the Zoom audience.
Yeah. Well, do you want to go first or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think one of the things that is most important about the ACT matrix is, as Joe was saying, that there is the side that you want less of and the side you want more of, but really that noticing and lack of judgment is really, really key. So individually, we want to be aiming to achieve psychological flexibility, which is the ability to notice our thoughts and feelings and continue to move in the direction that is most beneficial or most adaptable in that moment. Sometimes that involves engaging in some of the behaviors on the left-hand or right-hand side, in the avoiding area. It's not the same as attributing bad versus good. And then Similarly, when we go a step above this, so this is the individual act matrix. When you look at it from a group standpoint, the goal is then to achieve psychological safety, which is, again, non-judgmentally observing group behavior and recognizing that sometimes, oh, what can I say? Yeah.
I can actually take it off the screen too.
Oh, okay. Uh, you can see the group then. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So and then, so what was I going to say? Yeah. So okay. So psychological flexibility is essentially observing group behavior non-judgmentally, and I think that there is a difference between when I've done this in groups at with my agency at work. There is a big difference when you go from the individual act matrix and you ask somebody, what is important to you? What are some of the thoughts and feelings that hook you or get in the way of you moving towards your values, and so on and so forth, to then going up a step. And it's not easy for a lot of people to think from a group standpoint. They oftentimes get stuck in thinking about themselves. And so that is the one beauty of the matrix, is you can use it in different ways. You can use it individually. You can use it for the individual viewing their part in the group. So what do you value about being in the group? And then you can also take it another step further and build a lot of perspective taking skills and saying, okay, so you individually, what do you think is meaningful for the group? Or we can sit here and do it as a group all together. I quite frequently use this matrix when working with children with autism, because perspective building is quite difficult for a lot of individuals on the spectrum. So that's also just another thing to keep in mind, that it's helpful, to be honest, for everybody. A lot of people have a hard time taking the perspective of others. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I just, as a quick comment before passing it to Penny, is that this ACT matrix is used by tens of thousands of therapists and people in organizational management. It is incredibly useful and has a huge track record of evidence-based research in a variety of settings all around the world. So it's not, that's why I'd say the ACT matrix itself represents a body of knowledge.
So I think they've both said most of what I would say. The one thing I would add is if you think about groups and what goes wrong in groups, a lot of times it's somebody, or more than maybe yourself or somebody else's, their stuff comes up, right? And they kind of go a little crazy, right? It's because it's the trauma comes up, and there's the coping mechanisms that come up with that. There's people want to run away. There's people want to fight. It depends. It depends on how they have coped with their own internal traumas. And so part of this is when you set a clear intention or a clear purpose for yourself. I want to be this kind of person in this, and I want to go for this purpose, and I need to stay on this purpose. You set your values, you set your intention. Then whatever is getting in the way of you doing that is going to come up in the process. So when you're in a group, because it can't not come up in the process, it's like you set this intention and you haven't been living in that way. It's this future self, this future goal. Then it has to come up for it to be met and healed in a new way. And it tends to come up in the middle of the group, and it can be really ugly. And this is where we do that deeper healing work. So it's really important to have these intentions, and I want to be this kind of person. I want to live regeneratively. And then all the things come up. And then if you can see it in that way, that, oh, I can work with this. I can meet this in a different way, and I can heal this part of myself. That's why this is so powerful, because you have that purpose, and it brings up what needs to be healed for you to live into that. And then that allows you to stay on purpose in a group. So you don't get veered off with your own trauma or the group doesn't get veered off because everybody is committed to doing the healing as you move toward the purpose.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of piggyback off of that is having a more values-based approach versus a goal-oriented approach. You're really using your values more as a North Star rather than a goal might be a specific place on the map. And thinking of it instead of I need to get to this location versus I want to go north. If there's barriers in your way, you might get off track, you might circle around, but you're always heading in that north direction versus getting so stuck on needing to. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think that's just a healthier way for groups and individuals to function as well.
Yeah. So I know that's a lot of presentation, and I think it's good to have this context for two reasons, and that is that what we found in our experience doing work with prosocial groups is that one person knowing how this works in the group is really helpful, but it doesn't transform the group. But if everyone in the group knows this, it's a game changer. Everyone in the group is working on these things together with a shared understanding of what it means to be an effective group and shared language. And we find that actually people even use the technical language, like in Earth Regenerators, so many people have gone through prosocial training or have been in groups that are facilitated in this way, that they use shorthand words like CDP3, just core design principle number 3. They just throw out these technical words because there's enough shared understanding that people actually know what they mean. And I found it to be a big success that we got to nerdy jargon, because this concept was so internalized in the culture and enough people knew what it meant that it actually supported the dialogue instead of undermining it. So I just want to say this is one of the key pieces, is that when you have a level of cooperation where everyone is learning how to cooperate while they're cooperating toward a shared goal, that's where the magic happens. And so I just want to name that piece. And Anna, do you have the ability on your computer to help with breakouts for people that are there? Or with my computer, since yours is almost dead? Because it'd be nice for us to have some time for group discussion, but I'd love to invite people on Zoom to maybe chat amongst each other, or it looks like a small enough group, they might want to all stay in the same group instead of breakouts. And for us to have the opportunity to talk in a big group, but then get into small group discussions. So what I was thinking first is, are there any questions about what we've talked about? Sarah, please.
I'm just curious if there is embedded into the work within our explicit acceptance of power, precedent, and trauma in terms of using the matrix.
So the question, so it's closer to the microphone, is do discussions of power, trauma, and what was the other one? And oppression. I would say you cannot go more than 5 minutes without all of those things coming up. And those are exactly what Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles are about. So they are always part of it, whether they're explicitly named or not. They come up very quickly. Like Penny and I have a little game we play, which is we don't mention trauma, and we wait if it takes 20 minutes or 25 minutes into the process, because it doesn't take an hour, it doesn't take 3 days, it doesn't take 3 months. It's instant. It always comes up. Power dynamics always come up as well. So we know that all of this is about power dynamics and about trauma and about these issues that you're describing. And so we're ready. We're sort of like ready for it, and we don't even need to name it. And it's sort of a fun game to see just how quickly it comes up. So I see that Eric and Charlie have their hands up. So maybe, do you have the ability to unmute so that Eric can speak? So we can hear him?
Yeah.
Oh, I can hear him here. Eric, please.
Okay.
And then
Sure. Just going back to the very beginning of your description of the ACT therapy training, there were 3 principles to that training. One was notice without judgment. Second was accept without bias. And I managed to miss at least not transcribe what the third one was. Could you just?
Okay. Yeah, I can cover that. So the the three elements that I described for the ACT matrix were noticing without judgment, and then coming to a place of acceptance about what we're noticing so that we can commit. This is why it's called acceptance and commitment. Is the acceptance part is just accepting what's real. Like, oh, I'm doing this thing. I might be doing something I really don't like about myself. So acceptance is really hard. That's probably the hardest part. Accepting without judgment. From accepting without judgment, we can commit to what we want, which means we have had some kind of an exploration to clarify what we're committing to. So I might commit to facing my inner demons. If I'm a meth addict, for an example, like I might be a really abusive person. And this paradoxical way the trauma works, when I am, like, let's say that I hate being an abusive person. And so I get really stressed. So then I do something like methamphetamines to calm me and feel good, which then takes away my control, which causes me to become aggressive and get into fights. I've just created the perfect cycle, that vicious cycle, to reproduce the conditions of hating myself, and then it continues. So accepting my inability to control that, and that's obvious, that would be a therapeutic setting where I really couldn't handle that on my own, that the commitment might include things like, actually literally committing myself to a detox center, or it might be some kind of a counseling team, or it might be something like Alcoholics Anonymous, depending on what it is. So the commitment part is probably a big deal in that situation. But you can imagine in lesser situations, like I might just commit to recycling more. But you notice how hard it is for people to recycle. And I might commit to eating less sugar. Penny laughs because she knows that I'm a total sugar junkie. So you can see that the commitment part's a big deal. And that's where the North Star that Anna was talking about comes in.
Yeah, and I do just want to add to that. I think a lot of people, when they hear acceptance, they think that you need to accept that's just who I am, and that's just how it is, and I'm going to accept the way my life is right now. And it's different in that it's some therapies you might have heard of trying to have more positive thoughts, or if somebody you make a negative comment about yourself and somebody says, oh no, you're not that way, you're a good person, blah, and that, so on and so forth. Acceptance is accepting the fact that you're feeling a certain way, and instead of trying to change it and say like, oh, I'm sad today, but I should be happy because I have, I have a great life. I'm very privileged. And instead of trying to argue with yourself, you accept that this is my feeling. It's valid. It's valid that I feel down about myself, and I'm not going to argue with myself, and then committing to change. So it's not accepting about where you are in life. It's just accepting the emotions that you feel and the thoughts, and instead of arguing with them, you're going to move forward.
And just to follow on very quickly with that, in the notice without judgment, you had mentioned various imagination exercises you could take to try to imagine how you could become a better person. The acceptance part is a little bit more tricky, and I was wondering if you have any particularly useful recommendations for how to make this into a game for people.
And so the question was about how to imagine alternative futures to figure out what you want to commit to, and if we know of any creative games or interesting insights for how to do this. What I think is actually it's better to let this wait until we get into group discussions and actually have that be something that can come up in the group discussion. And then also, since there are two more people with their hands raised in the Zoom, I'd like to be able to basically divide us where you all talk to each other and we can talk here. So there's less of this division that's basically everyone sitting here waiting as we're talking to you. I'd like to get us through that a little bit more efficiently to the place where we can talk amongst each other. And that would be a nice topic of conversation. But I'd love to hear from Charlie and then to Margot. So Charlie, on to you.
Yeah, you mentioned, Joe, you mentioned Skinner several times, and I'm wondering if people have tried to integrate this approach with classic behaviorism as far as like scheduled reinforcement that.
Yeah, so the question was, because I'd mentioned B.F. Skinner, have people tried to connect this with B.F. Skinner's work? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And two of the people that I know personally, actually 3 people I know of, who work a lot with this approach, which is Anthony Biglin, Stephen Hayes, and Paul Atkins, are all trained Skinnerians who have then updated with all of the improvements and critiques to his ideas and incorporated many other bodies of knowledge, and that they are broadly consistent with the research program he initiated, which has, of course, come a long way since the original ideas. So the answer is a resounding yes, and that there are many places to look for this, but I think just doing some searches for materials on contextual behavioral science, you can look for how those connect to the history of the work with B.F. Skinner, and you'll find lots of references to how strong and important that foundational work was, how various people misunderstood what he was doing and took it in different directions, and how various things he was doing, like all science, were later improved upon and were disproven. And so, so I would say it's very strongly aligned with the Skinnerian approach, updated appropriately in the 70 years of learning that have happened since then. So yeah, and is there anything you want to add to that, Anna?
No, that's basically so. And Stephen Hayes, who was the founder, really, who started contextual behavioral science. He is a BCBA, a board certified behavior analyst, and applied behavior analysis is directly related to B.F. Skinner's work. So yes, it's very much in line.
Yeah. So Margot, on to you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say last night and today were absolutely fabulous experiences for me. And last night we were talking about the globe, and today we're talking about individuals. And I've certainly had experiences with groups, and overheard someone in Kingston, New York saying, I'm done with activism because everybody fights with each other. So they all have good ideas, but they're not working together. And so I suppose partly the breakfast tomorrow morning is going to address with our getting together in our little groups about how we here in this bioregion of the Great Lakes can move forward. There are very specific areas that need work. And so I'm wondering if you're going to talk at all today or tomorrow about integrating the groups, because we've gone from globe to individual, and now how do we all work together?
Yeah, so what she's asking is, first, she really celebrates how we went from a pretty global or planetary perspective yesterday to something really local to individuals and small groups, and how are we going to integrate them so that we can move forward with what's happening here in Rochester and what can happen at the bioregional level or at the Great Lakes level. And I would say for me, the whole point of today's discussion is to do 2 things. One, to share this knowledge, which is really valuable. And the other is to make very concrete how we go about doing the collaborative work that we would do at the landscape scale. Is that all of these things we're talking about now are really good to explore as how does it relate to me in small groups, so that I can practice and understand it and internalize it into my life, and then have more people that I can work with in this way on these local challenges, like what we talked about briefly yesterday with Greentopia, creating a green urban park around the upper fall or the high falls on the Genesee River, and how to transform the urban core, or other things that involve a lot of cooperation. How would projects like that be informed by this kind of knowledge and this kind of practice? And what I would say is that that's the natural continuation of this, is we sort of went up and out into the world. Now we're going down and into ourselves so that we can feel what it's like to be in groups, so that we can then talk with a clear way together. What would it mean to form effective groups? And what kinds of groups should be effective? And what kinds of effective groups should be created for this work of bioregional work? And I think that will come up a little bit today. And also tomorrow morning with the brunch and the meetup that we'll have will continue. And that this will just be an ongoing exploration